You think you're broken. You've been telling yourself that story for weeks now, maybe months, maybe longer. You look at the wreckage of what used to be your life, and you search for the moment it all went wrong, the decision that ruined everything, the mistake that can't be unmade. But here's the truth they don't tell you when you're standing in the rubble. Rock bottom isn't the end of your story. It's the only honest place you've ever stood. Everything before this? It was scaffolding, borrowed beliefs, inherited dreams, the image you thought you had to maintain, the role you believed you had to play, the version of success someone else defined and you chased until your lungs burned and your soul went numb. And now it's gone. All of it. The job, the relationship, the certainty, the plan, the identity you wrapped around yourself like armor, thinking it would protect you, not realizing it was slowly suffocating the person you actually are. You didn't lose everything. Everything false fell away. And I know that doesn't feel like a gift right now. I know the weight of failure sits on your chest like concrete. I know you wake up at 3 a.m. with your heart racing and your mind screaming that you're not enough, that you'll never recover, that everyone else has it figured out and you're the only one drowning. But here's what changes everything. Rock bottom is the first place you meet yourself without the costume. It's the only ground solid enough to build something real. It's not the end. It's the sacred restart. And this audiobook, it's not about bouncing back. It's not about returning to who you were before the fall. Because who you were before wasn't working. That's why you're here. This is about what you build next. This is about discovering that the version of you that survives this moment is stronger, truer, and more alive than anything you've ever been. This is about learning that losing everything is the most brutal, beautiful permission you'll ever receive to start becoming who you actually are. So take a breath. You're standing on holy ground. And the fall that brought you here, it didn't destroy you. It saved you. Chapter 1. The Holy Ground of Nothing. Picture this. You're standing in a room that used to feel like yours. Maybe it's your apartment, your office, the driver's seat of your car. It doesn't matter. What matters is that everything familiar suddenly feels foreign. The walls are the same, but you're different. Hollowed out, scraped clean. You thought you knew who you were. You had a title, a routine, a story you could tell at dinner parties that made sense, that made people nod and smile and say, "Oh, that's great." You had plans, goals, a trajectory. You were someone. And now, you're not. Now you're standing in the aftermath, surrounded by the shattered pieces of the life you thought you were supposed to want. And the most terrifying part isn't the loss. It's the silence. Because for the first time in maybe years, maybe ever, there's no script, no role to perform, no expectation to meet, no distraction loud enough to drown out the question that's been waiting in the dark this whole time. Who am I without all of this? That question is a knife. It cuts through every lie you've ever told yourself, every compromise you made to fit in, every dream you abandoned because it didn't look like success, every moment you chose safety over truth. And here's what nobody tells you about rock bottom. It's not the fall that breaks you. It's the stillness afterward. Because in that stillness, you can't hide anymore. You can't busy yourself into numbness. You can't chase the next achievement, the next distraction, the next version of better that keeps you running from the now. All the noise you used to build your life around has gone quiet. And in that quiet, you finally hear it, the truth. The truth is, you were exhausted. You were performing a life that didn't fit. You were climbing a ladder only to realize halfway up that it was leaning against the wrong wall. You were saying yes when you meant no. You were tolerating what should have been unacceptable. You were shrinking to make others comfortable. And some part of you knew. Some part of you has always known. That's the part that's awake now. Researchers at the University of Virginia conducted a study where participants were left alone in a room with nothing but their thoughts for 15 minutes. The only other option, they could press a button and give themselves a painful electric shock. 67% of men and 25% of women chose to shock themselves rather than sit in silence. Think about that. We would rather experience physical pain than face the truth of our own minds. But you don't have that option anymore. The distractions have fallen away. The identities you clung to have dissolved. The life you built to avoid this exact moment has collapsed. And now, you're here, standing on the holy ground of nothing. I know it doesn't feel holy. I know it feels like punishment, like failure, like proof that you weren't strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough to make it work. But what if it's not? What if rock bottom isn't a verdict on your worth? What if it's an invitation? An invitation to stop performing, to stop pretending, to stop building a life designed to impress people that don't actually know you? What if this moment, this terrible, gut-wrenching, soul-shaking moment, is the first honest one you've had in years? Because here's the gift buried in the wreckage. Nothing left to lose means nothing left to protect. And when you have nothing to protect, you have nothing to fear. You don't have to maintain the image anymore. You don't have to defend the choices that brought you here. You don't have to justify your existence or apologize for taking up space, or twist yourself into shapes that make others comfortable. You can just be. Raw, unfinished, uncertain, real. That's the holy ground. Not the certainty, not the achievement, not the applause or the outcome or the proof that you matter. The holy ground is the willingness to stand in the rubble and say, I don't know who I am anymore. And maybe that's okay. Because the version of you that you lost, that wasn't the real you. That was the version you constructed to survive, to be loved, to be accepted, to be safe. And it worked for a while. But survival isn't the same as living. And safety isn't the same as freedom. You didn't come here to survive. You came here to become. And becoming requires shedding. It requires loss. It requires the kind of brutal, beautiful destruction that clears the ground so something truer can grow. So yes, you've lost everything. But everything you lost was in the way. The job that drained you, the relationship that diminished you, the belief that you had to be perfect to be loved, the story that your worth was conditional, the idea that you could outrun your own truth. All of it, gone. And in its place, space. Raw, terrifying, infinite space. This is where the sacred restart begins. Not with answers, not with a plan, not with certainty or clarity or a 5-step process to fix what's broken. It begins with presence. It begins with you, standing in the wreckage and choosing not to run. It begins with the quiet, radical act of saying, I'm here. I don't know what comes next, but I'm here. That's the ground. That's the foundation. That's the only solid thing you need. Because everything you build from here won't be borrowed. It won't be performed. It won't be designed to please or impress or prove. It will be yours. Chapter 2. The Inventory of Ashes. You want to know what's left. That's the first instinct after the fall. You stand in the wreckage and you start searching, cataloging, trying to salvage something, anything that proves you weren't completely destroyed. Maybe it's a skill, a relationship, a memory of who you used to be before everything crumbled. You hold it up to the light and you think, okay, this survived. I can rebuild from this. But here's what you don't realize yet. Some things that survived shouldn't have. Some things you're clinging to are the very reasons you fell in the first place. And the hardest part of rock bottom isn't losing what you loved. It's realizing that some of what you loved was poison. This is the inventory of ashes. This is where you stop running from the truth and start facing it. Where you sort through what remains and ask the question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What was I carrying that I never actually wanted? Because the fall didn't just take your job, your relationship, your certainty. It exposed the weight you didn't even know you were carrying. The beliefs that weren't yours. The expectations you inherited. The version of success you chased because everyone around you said it mattered, not because it resonated with anything real inside you. You didn't lose everything. You lost the performance. And now you're left with the truth. Let me tell you what that looks like. It looks like sitting in your car in a parking lot at 2 p.m, staring at nothing, realizing you don't actually know what you want anymore. Because for so long, your wants were shaped by what others needed from you. It looks like scrolling through old photos and not recognizing the person smiling back. Not because they're gone, but because you finally see how hard they were trying, how much they were pretending. It looks like admitting that the relationship you mourned wasn't healthy, that the job you lost was crushing you, that the life you built was impressive to everyone except the person living it. That's the inventory. And it's brutal because it forces you to confront the gap between who you were and who you pretended to be, between what you said mattered and what you actually spent your energy on, between the values you claimed and the compromises you made. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs at the same time. I was happy, but I was miserable. I was successful, but I felt empty. I was loved, but I felt unseen. Most people resolve that dissonance by numbing it, by working harder, drinking more, scrolling endlessly, chasing the next thing that might finally fill the void. But you can't do that anymore because rock bottom stripped away the distractions. And now you're face to face with the truth you've been avoiding. So let's do the inventory. Not the one that counts your achievements or your losses. Not the one that tallies what you had versus what you have now. The real one. The one that asks, what beliefs was I living by that were never mine? Start there. Maybe it was the belief that your worth is tied to your productivity, that rest is laziness, that struggle equals virtue, that if you're not constantly achieving, you're falling behind. Where did that come from? Not from you. From a culture that profits from your exhaustion. From a system that needs you to believe your value is conditional, so you'll keep performing, keep consuming, keep chasing the next upgrade. You internalized it. You built your life around it. And when you couldn't maintain it anymore, when your body and your mind and your soul finally said enough, you didn't see it as failure. It was your truth breaking through the lie. Or maybe it was the belief that you have to have it all figured out, that uncertainty is weakness, that asking for help is admitting defeat, that you should be further along by now. Who told you that? Not the version of you that's real, the version that's been buried under layers of expectation and comparison and inherited shame. That version knows the truth. That growth is messy. That healing isn't linear. That the strongest thing you can do is admit you don't have the answers. Or maybe it was the belief that love has to be earned, that you're only worthy of connection if you're useful, if you're easy, if you never ask for too much. Think about that. How many times did you shrink to make someone else comfortable? How many times did you silence your needs because you were afraid of being too much? How many versions of yourself did you abandon in the name of being loved? And what did it get you? A life that looked good from the outside and felt hollow from the inside. A life where you were praised for being strong but punished for being human. A life where you were surrounded by people but profoundly alone. That's what you lost. And I know it still hurts. I know you still wake up some mornings and wish you could go back. I know there are moments when the loneliness feels unbearable and the uncertainty feels like drowning. But going back isn't an option. Because the person you were before the fall, they were barely surviving. They were holding it together with duct tape and willpower, and the desperate hope that if they just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, performed well enough, it would finally feel like enough. But it never did. Because enough isn't something you achieve, it's something you decide. And you can't decide that while you're still carrying beliefs that were designed to keep you small. So this is the work. Not rebuilding what you lost, not returning to who you were. This is about letting the ashes settle so you can see what's underneath. This is about recognizing that some of what burned needed to burn. That some of what you're mourning was never serving you. That some of the weight you're carrying isn't yours to carry. And this is about making a choice. You can take this moment and use it to reconstruct the same life with different wallpaper. You can find a new job that exhausts you in new ways. You can enter a new relationship with the same patterns. You can chase a new version of success that still leaves you empty. Or you can do something different. You can use this moment to ask the questions you've been avoiding. What do I actually want? Not what I'm supposed to want. Not what looks good. Not what makes sense. What do I want? What do I actually value? Not what I inherited. Not what I was taught. What matters to me, in my bones, when no one's watching? What kind of life do I want to build? Not the one that impresses. Not the one that's safe. The one that feels true. Those questions don't have easy answers. And that's the point. Because easy answers are how you ended up here in the first place. Easy answers are what you get when you follow the script, when you do what you're told, when you build a life based on someone else's blueprint. And look where that got you. So no more easy answers. No more borrowed beliefs. No more performing a life that doesn't fit. This is the inventory of ashes. This is where you sort through the wreckage and decide what's worth keeping. And here's the truth. Most of it isn't. Most of it was weight. Most of it was armor. Most of it was the accumulated debris of a life built to survive, not to thrive. So let it go. Let go of the belief that you have to have it all figured out. Let go of the need to prove your worth. Let go of the idea that rock bottom is a place of shame. Because it's not. It's the place where you finally get honest. It's the place where you stop pretending and start becoming. It's the place where the sacred restart begins. Not with what you lost, with what remains when everything falls away. And that's the foundation you've been searching for. Chapter 3. When Identity Shatters. There's a moment that comes after the fall that no one warns you about. It's not the initial crash, not the shock of loss, or the sharp sting of failure. Those are loud. Those are obvious. Those you expect. This moment is quieter. It happens when the dust starts to settle and you reach for the story you've always told yourself about who you are, and your hand closes around nothing. You wake up one morning and the narrative that used to define you, the job title, the relationship status, the role you played in other people's lives, is gone. And without it, you don't know how to answer the simplest question in the world. Who am I? That's when identity shatters. And it doesn't break clean. It doesn't crack into two neat pieces you can glue back together. It fractures into 1,000 sharp fragments, each one reflecting a different version of who you thought you were, who you tried to be, who you pretended to be to survive. And suddenly, you're standing there, bleeding from cuts you didn't see coming, realizing that the person you've been introducing to the world for years was a composite, a construction. Not a lie exactly, but not the whole truth either. Here's what I mean. You thought you were your achievements, the degrees you earned, the promotions you chased, the milestones you hit that proved you were making progress, that you were enough, that you mattered. But now those achievements are gone, or they've lost their meaning, and you're still here. So if you're not your resume, then who are you? You thought you were your relationships, the partner who needed you, the friends who relied on you, the family who defined you by the role you filled. Daughter, son, caretaker, fixer, the one who holds it together. But now those relationships have shifted or ended or revealed themselves to be conditional, and you're still here. So if you're not your role, then who are you? You thought you were your story, the narrative of overcoming, of resilience, of never giving up. The one where you're the hero who pushes through, who doesn't quit, who makes it work no matter what. But that story led you here, to burnout, to breakdown, to the realization that pushing through isn't the same as healing, and resilience without rest is just slow self-destruction. So if you're not your story, then who are you? This is the crisis. Not the external one, the internal one. The one where every pillar of identity you built your life on crumbles, and you're left standing in the rubble wondering if there's anything underneath. And here's the truth that will either terrify you or set you free. There is something underneath, but it's not what you think. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades. They call it identity foreclosure, the process of adopting an identity without exploring alternatives. You become who you're expected to be, who you're told to be, who the world needs you to be. And it works, for a while, until it doesn't. Until the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be becomes so wide that something has to give. And when it does, when the identity you built collapses, you're not losing yourself. You're finding the edges of the costume. You're discovering where you end and the performance begins. And that discovery is excruciating. Because the performance wasn't random. It was strategic. It was designed to keep you safe, to help you belong, to protect you from the rejection you feared most. You learned early that certain parts of you were acceptable and others weren't. That expressing certain emotions got you love and others got you abandoned. That success looked a specific way and deviation meant failure. So you adapted. You became what was rewarded. You hid what was punished. You built an identity that could navigate the world without getting destroyed. And it worked, until rock bottom shattered it. Now you're left with the parts you hid, the emotions you suppressed, the desires you ignored, the version of yourself you abandoned because it didn't fit the script. And you don't know what to do with them, because for so long you defined yourself by what you did, not by who you are. You were productive, helpful, successful, strong. But strip away the doing and what's left? Just you. Unadorned, unproven, uncertain. And that feels like nothing. But it's not nothing. It's everything. Let me show you what I mean. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're sitting across from someone who loves you, not for what you do, not for what you provide, not for the role you play in their life. They love you for the way you exist, for the specific cadence of your laugh, for the way your mind works when you're lost in thought, for the particular flavor of kindness you offer without thinking, for the quiet moments when you forget to perform and you just are. Can you feel that? Can you feel the difference between being loved for your function and being loved for your presence? That's the identity underneath. Not the one you constructed to survive, the one that's been there all along, waiting for you to stop performing long enough to notice. It's not loud, it's not impressive. It doesn't come with a title or a metric or proof of worth. It just is. And that's why it's so easy to miss. Because we live in a world that worships doing, that measures value by output, that asks, "What do you do?" before it asks, "Who are you?" So you learn to define yourself by your function, by how much you could handle, how much you could achieve, how much you could endure without breaking. And when you broke, you thought you lost yourself. But you didn't. You lost the armor. You lost the performance. You lost the version of yourself that was designed to meet everyone else's expectations. And now you're left with the raw, unfinished truth of who you actually are. No title to hide behind, no achievement to validate you, no role to define you. Just you. And I know that feels terrifying. I know it feels like standing naked in a room full of strangers, exposed and vulnerable and utterly defenseless. But here's what changes everything. That vulnerability, that's not weakness. That's authenticity. That's the version of you that doesn't need to prove anything, that doesn't need to perform, that doesn't need to twist itself into shapes to earn love or approval or acceptance. That's the version of you that's been buried under layers of expectation and compromise and inherited shame. And rock bottom didn't destroy it. Rock bottom revealed it. So yes, your identity shattered. The constructed one, the conditional one, the one that required constant maintenance and validation and proof. But the real one? The one underneath all the noise. That's still here. It's been here the whole time, waiting for you to stop running, stop performing, stop trying to be anyone other than exactly who you are. And now you have a choice. You can spend your energy trying to rebuild the old identity. You can search for a new title, a new role, a new story that makes you feel solid again. Or you can sit in this shattered space and get curious. Who am I when I'm not performing? What do I actually enjoy when I'm not trying to impress anyone? What does my voice sound like when I'm not adapting it to fit the room? What do I want when I'm not filtering it through what I'm supposed to want? Those questions don't have quick answers. And that's okay. Because the goal isn't to rebuild a new identity. The goal is to learn how to exist without one. To learn how to be a person, not a persona. To learn how to show up in the world as something other than a carefully curated image. This is the work. Not who you were, not who you should be. Who you are, right now, in this moment, without the costume. And I won't lie to you. It's disorienting. It's uncomfortable. It requires sitting with uncertainty in a way that feels like drowning. But it's also the most honest thing you've ever done. Because the identity you're building now won't be borrowed. It won't be inherited. It won't be designed to please. It will be yours. Messy and unfinished and imperfect. But real. And that's the gift of the shatter. Not the destruction,
the honesty that comes after.
Chapter 4. The Silence That Teaches. You've been running from silence your entire life. You just didn't realize it. You called it productivity, ambition, staying busy, keeping your mind occupied, filling every gap in your schedule with something, anything that kept the noise going, because the noise was safe. The noise drowned out the questions you didn't want to answer, the feelings you didn't want to feel, the truth you weren't ready to face. But now, the noise is gone, and the silence is deafening. This is the part of rock bottom no one talks about. Not the fall itself, but the aftermath, the stillness. The hours that stretch into days where there's nothing to do, nowhere to be, no one demanding anything from you. Just you and the silence. And the silence has something to say. At first, it feels like punishment. You sit with it for 30 seconds and your skin starts crawling. Your mind races, your body tenses. Every instinct screams at you to do something, check something, fix something, anything to escape the unbearable weight of just being. You reach for your phone, scroll through feeds that don't matter, open apps you've already checked. Refresh, refresh, refresh. Not because you're looking for something specific, because you're running from something specific. The silence and what it reveals. Because in the silence, there's no performance, no distraction, no story you can tell yourself about who you are or where you're going or why it's all going to be okay. There's just the raw, unfiltered experience of being alive in this moment. And that's terrifying, because this moment isn't always comfortable. It's not always hopeful. It's not anything you can package into an Instagram caption or a motivational quote. Sometimes, this moment is grief. Sometimes, it's rage. Sometimes, it's the suffocating realization that you've been lying to yourself for years, and now you have to face it. So you run. You fill the silence with podcasts, Netflix, work emails at midnight, conversations that don't mean anything, plans that keep you perpetually future-focused so you never have to be here. But rock bottom took your running shoes. Now, the silence follows you everywhere. It's there in the morning when you wake up without a purpose. It's there in the afternoon when you realize you have nothing to do and no one to be. It's there at night when you lie in bed and the thoughts you've been avoiding all day finally catch up. And you have two choices. You can keep fighting it, keep trying to fill the void with noise that doesn't nourish you, keep running from the one conversation you actually need to have. Or you can stop. You can turn toward the silence instead of away from it. You can ask it what it's trying to teach you. Because here's the truth. Silence isn't empty. It's full. Full of everything you've been too distracted to notice, everything you've been too afraid to feel, everything you've been too busy to process. The silence is where healing happens, but only if you let it. Neuroscientist Dr. Marcus Reichel discovered something fascinating when he studied the brain's default mode network, the neural system that activates when you're not focused on the external world. He found that when the brain is at rest, when it's not being stimulated by tasks or screens or external demands, it doesn't shut down. It lights up. It begins processing, integrating, making sense of experiences you didn't have time to understand when they were happening. The brain needs silence to heal. But we've built a world that's terrified of it, a world that equates stillness with laziness, that measures worth by busyness, that treats rest like a luxury instead of a necessity. So you learned to run. You learned that productivity equals value, that stopping means falling behind, that silence is something to avoid, not something to embrace. And it worked. Until it didn't. Until your body forced you to stop, until burnout or breakdown or collapse made the choice for you. And now you're here.
In the silence, you've spent your whole life avoiding. And it's not punishing you.
It's teaching you. Let me tell you what it's trying to say. First, it's saying you don't have to earn your existence. You don't have to be productive to deserve rest. You don't have to achieve to justify taking up space. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. You are enough, exactly as you are, in this moment, doing nothing. That's the lesson you've been running from, because if you're enough without the doing, then what were you killing yourself for? What were you sacrificing for? What was the point of all that striving if it wasn't making you more valuable? The point was survival. But you're not trying to survive anymore. You're trying to live. And living requires a different metric. Not how much you can do, how deeply you can be. Second, the silence is saying the feelings you've been avoiding won't kill you. The grief, the anger, the shame, the loneliness, the fear that you're not enough and you never will be. You've been running from them because you thought they would consume you, that if you let yourself feel them fully, you disappear into the darkness and never come back. But that's not how feelings work. Feelings aren't permanent states. They're waves. They rise, they peak, they crash, they recede. But only if you let them move. When you run from them, when you numb them, when you bury them under noise and distraction and relentless doing, they don't go away. They calcify. They become the background hum of your existence, the low-grade anxiety you can't name, the exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, the emptiness that achievement doesn't fill. The silence is giving you permission to finally feel them, to sit with the grief and let it wash over you, to acknowledge the anger without needing to fix it, to name the shame without letting it define you. Not because it's comfortable, because it's true. And truth, even painful truth, is the only foundation solid enough to build on. Third, the silence is saying, you've been living someone else's life. You've been following a script that was written before you were born. Achieve this, buy that, look like this, act like that, want what everyone else wants. Be grateful for what you have. Don't ask for too much. And you did it. You followed the rules, you played the game, you checked the boxes, and it brought you here. To a life that looks good on paper and feels hollow in practice. The silence is showing you the gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be, between what you actually want and what you've been told to want, between the life you're living and the life that's actually yours. And that gap is where the sacred restart begins. Not by ignoring it, by honoring it. By finally asking yourself the questions the noise was designed to drown out. What do I actually want? What matters to me when no one's watching? What would I do if I wasn't afraid? What would I choose if I didn't have to prove anything? Those questions don't have easy answers. They require sitting in the silence long enough to hear your own voice underneath all the borrowed ones. They require stillness, patience, the willingness to not know. And that's uncomfortable, because not knowing feels like failing, like you should have it figured out by now, like everyone else has the answers and you're the only one still searching. But that's the lie. Everyone else is just better at hiding in the noise. You're here because you can't hide anymore, because the silence found you, and instead of running, you're learning to listen. So sit with it. Not forever, not perfectly, just for a moment. Let the silence speak. Let it show you what you've been avoiding. Let it reveal what you've been carrying.
Let it teach you that stillness isn't emptiness. It's clarity. And clarity is the most valuable thing you'll ever find. Not because it gives you answers, because it gives you the courage to ask better questions. And those questions, they're the beginning of everything.
Chapter 5. Hunger as Compass. There's a hunger inside you that has nothing to do with food. It's been there for as long as you can remember. Gnawing, restless, insatiable. You've tried to feed it with achievement, with validation, with the next milestone, the next relationship, the next thing that might finally make you feel complete. But it never works, because what you're hungry for can't be earned. It can't be achieved or acquired or given to you by someone else. It can only be remembered. This is the part where everything shifts, where you stop seeing the hunger as a problem to solve and start recognizing it as a compass pointing you home. Because that ache you've been carrying, that sense that something's missing, that you're not quite whole, that there's a version of yourself you haven't met yet, that's not evidence of your brokenness. That's your soul trying to get your attention. Let me tell you what I mean. You grew up learning to distrust your hunger. When you wanted too much, you were called greedy. When you asked for what you needed, you were called selfish. When you reached for something beyond what was expected, you were told to be realistic, to stay in your lane, to be grateful for what you had. So you learned to want what you were supposed to want. The stable job, the committed relationship, the house, the car, the markers of success that prove you're doing it right. And maybe you got those things. Maybe you checked every box on the list someone else wrote for your life. But the hunger didn't go away. It just got louder. Because the hunger wasn't asking for the things you thought you were supposed to want. It was asking for the truth. For the life you're actually meant to live. For the work that makes you come alive. For the relationships that see you, not the version of you that's easy to love. For permission to be weird and wild and wholly yourself. For the courage to stop performing and start becoming. But you couldn't hear it. Not through the noise. Not through the expectations. Not through the voice in your head that sounded like your parents, your teachers, your culture, telling you to be reasonable, to play it safe, to stop wanting so much. So you kept feeding the hunger the wrong things. You worked harder, achieved more, accumulated evidence of your worth, proved you were valuable, useful, necessary. And for a while, it quieted the ache. Until it didn't. Until you woke up one day in the life you built to silence the hunger and realized the hunger was the only honest thing you had left. That's what rock bottom does. It strips away everything you used to feed the hunger that wasn't actually nourishing you. The external validation, the borrowed dreams, the achievements that looked impressive but felt empty. The relationships that needed you but didn't know you. All of it. Gone. And now the hunger is all that's left. Raw, undeniable, impossible to ignore. And here's what you need to understand. This is not a problem. This is the way forward. Because the hunger knows. It knows what you're meant to do, who you're meant to become, what your life is asking of you. It's been trying to tell you for years, but you were too busy trying to silence it to listen. Psychologist Abraham Maslow spent decades studying human motivation, and he discovered something profound. He found that beyond the basic needs, food, safety, belonging, there's a deeper hunger. He called it self-actualization. The need to become the fullest version of yourself. Not the version that fits, not the version that's safe,
the version that's true. And here's the critical part. That hunger doesn't go away when you ignore it. It intensifies. It shows up as restlessness, as dissatisfaction, as the nagging sense that you're living someone else's life. It shows up as the crisis that brought you here, because your soul will only tolerate betrayal for so long before it stages a rebellion. And that's what this is. Not a breakdown, a breakout.
Your hunger breaking through the walls you built to contain it. So stop fighting it. Stop trying to quiet it with things that don't satisfy. Stop apologizing for wanting more than what you're supposed to want. Stop pretending the hunger makes you broken. It doesn't. It makes you alive. And it's trying to guide you. But you have to learn how to listen. Here's how. First, you have to distinguish between the hunger that nourishes and the hunger that numbs. Because not all hunger points toward truth. Some of it is just pain looking for a distraction. The hunger that numbs is frantic, impulsive, desperate. It says, I need this right now or I'll die. It drives you toward things that feel good in the moment but leave you emptier afterward. The next drink, the next scroll, the next relationship that feels like salvation until it becomes another cage. That's not your compass. That's your pain trying to protect you from feeling. The hunger that nourishes is different. It's patient, persistent. It doesn't demand immediate satisfaction. It whispers instead of screams. It says, there's something here that matters. Pay attention. It pulls you toward the work that scares you because it actually means something. Toward the conversation you've been avoiding because it might change everything. Toward the version of yourself you've been too afraid to become. That hunger doesn't go away when you feed it. It deepens. It reveals new layers, new questions, new edges of yourself you didn't know existed. That's how you know it's true. Second, you have to get honest about what you're actually hungry for. Not what sounds good when you say it out loud. Not what fits the narrative of who you're supposed to be. What do you want when there's no one watching? When there's no one to impress and nothing to prove? What makes you feel alive in a way that has nothing to do with achievement or validation? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? If you knew no one would judge you? If you knew you were enough exactly as you are? Those questions will terrify you, because the answers won't make sense. They won't fit the plan. They won't look like success to anyone but you. And that's exactly why they matter. Because the hunger that's true doesn't care about your reputation. It doesn't care about your 5-year plan. It doesn't care if it's practical or profitable or what other people will think. It only cares about one thing: whether you're living in alignment with who you actually are. And if you're not, it will keep gnawing at you until you pay attention. Third, you have to stop treating the hunger like a problem to solve. Because it's not. It's not something to fix or overcome or transcend. It's not evidence that you're doing life wrong or that you'll never be satisfied. It's your internal guidance system. It's how your soul communicates with you, how it pulls you toward the experiences that will shape you, the work that will define you, the version of yourself you've been too afraid to become. So when the hunger shows up, don't run from it. Don't numb it or distract yourself or try to logic it away. Follow it. Even if it doesn't make sense. Even if it's inconvenient. Even if it asks you to let go of something you've been clinging to. Follow it. Because the hunger knows the way home. Not home as a place, home as a state of being, where you're not performing, not proving, not pretending, just present, just honest, just you. And yes, it's risky. Following the hunger means admitting you don't have it all figured out. It means choosing uncertainty over security.
It means walking away from the life that looks good to build the one that feels true. But here's what I know. You survived rock bottom just to rebuild the same cage with different bars. You survived it to remember who you are underneath all the conditioning, to reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned, to finally stop shrinking to fit and start expanding into the fullness of who you're meant to be. And the hunger is how you get there. Not by silencing it, by trusting it, by letting it pull you toward the life you're too afraid to admit you want. The one where you're not trying to be enough for everyone else. The one where you're already enough for yourself. That's the compass. That's the way forward. And it starts with the willingness to admit what you're actually hungry for. Not achievement, not approval, not proof that you matter. Truth. Aliveness. The courage to finally become yourself. So feel the hunger. Let it burn. Let it guide you toward the edges of who you've been and the center of who you are. Because on the other side of that hunger, that's where your life begins.
Chapter 6. The Unlearning. You think you need to learn more. That's what they taught you. That growth means accumulation, more knowledge, more skills, more strategies, more proof that you're moving forward. So, you read the books, you take the courses, you listen to the podcasts, you collect insights like armor, hoping that if you just learn enough, you'll finally figure out how to fix what's broken. But here's the truth they don't tell you. You don't need to learn more. You need to unlearn almost everything. Because the problem isn't what you don't know. It's what you know that isn't true. The beliefs you've been carrying like gospel. The rules you've been following like law. The stories about who you are and what you deserve and how the world works that have been shaping your choices since before you could name them. Those aren't facts. They're inherited fiction. And they've been running your life. This is the unlearning. And it's harder than any lesson you've ever learned. Because unlearning means admitting you were wrong. That the foundation you built your entire identity on was shaky. That the voices you trusted were sometimes lying. That the world you thought you understood was more complex, more broken, more beautiful than you were told. It means questioning everything. And that's terrifying. Because if everything you believed is up for debate, then where do you stand? What do you hold on to? How do you know what's real? You don't. Not at first. At first, you just fall. You fall through the certainty you used to cling to, through the answers that used to feel solid, through the identity you built on beliefs that are now crumbling. And you land here, in the sacred, disorienting space of not knowing. This is where the real work begins. Let me show you what needs to be unlearned. First, the belief that your worth is conditional. You learned this early, before you had words for it, before you could recognize it as a belief instead of a truth. You learned that love had to be earned, that approval was contingent on behavior, that if you were good enough, smart enough, useful enough, you would finally be worthy of belonging. So you spent your life trying to earn it. You became what others needed. You performed the version of yourself that got rewarded. You buried the parts that got punished. You measured your value by external metrics, grades, achievements, how much people needed you, how little space you took up. And it worked. Until it didn't. Until you burned out trying to be enough for everyone except yourself. Until you realized that no amount of achievement would ever silence the voice inside that said,
You weren't worthy unless you were useful. That belief is a lie. And unlearning it means sitting with the possibility that you were always worthy. Not because of what you did, because of what you are. Human. Flawed and messy and imperfect and still impossibly enough. You don't have to earn your existence. You don't have to justify taking up space. You don't have to prove your value to anyone, including the voices in your head that sound like everyone who ever made you feel small. You are worthy because you are. That's it. No conditions, no caveats, no performance required. Can you feel how that shifts everything? If you're already worthy, then what are you killing yourself for? What are you sacrificing? What are you trying to prove? Nothing. You're free. Free to stop performing, free to disappoint people, free to choose yourself without guilt. That's the first unlearning, and it will change your life if you let it. Second, the belief that success means never stopping. You learned that rest is laziness, that productivity equals value, that if you're not constantly moving forward, you're falling behind. So you became relentless. You pushed through exhaustion. You ignore your body's signals. You wore burnout like a badge of honor and called it dedication. You believed the lie that success requires sacrifice, that you have to give up your health, your relationships, your peace of mind to achieve something meaningful. And maybe you did achieve it. Maybe you climbed the mountain you were told to climb, reached the summit, and realized the view was nothing like the brochure promised. Because success built on self-destruction isn't success. It's slow suicide. And your body has been trying to tell you that for years. The migraines, the insomnia, the anxiety that won't quit, the exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, the sense that you're running on fumes and if you stop, even for a moment, you'll collapse. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Your body knows what your mind refuses to accept. You can't build a meaningful life on a foundation of depletion. So unlearn the belief that rest is optional. Unlearn the idea that your value is tied to your output. Unlearn the story that stopping means failing. Because rest isn't the absence of productivity. Rest is the foundation of sustainability. It's where your body heals, where your mind integrates, where your soul remembers why any of this matters. Without rest, you're just a machine running itself into the ground. With rest, you're a human being capable of creating something that actually matters. Third, the belief that you have to have it all figured out. You learned that uncertainty is weakness, that not knowing is failing, that you should have a plan, a path, a clear trajectory from here to there. So you clung to certainty even when it was killing you. You stayed in the job that drained you because leaving meant not knowing what came next. You stayed in the relationship that diminished you because being alone felt like admitting defeat. You followed the plan even when every cell in your body was screaming that it wasn't working. Because uncertainty felt like chaos, and chaos felt like death. But here's what you're learning now, in the wreckage of rock bottom. Uncertainty isn't chaos. It's possibility. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. It's the fertile ground where new versions of yourself can emerge. You can't plan your way through a transformation. You can't strategize your way into authenticity. You can't have it all figured out before you take the first step. You have to walk into the unknown and trust that the path will reveal itself. And that's terrifying, because the unknown doesn't come with guarantees. It doesn't promise safety or success or a happy ending. It only promises one thing: that you'll meet yourself in the process, the real you. Not the one you constructed to survive, not the one you perform to be loved, the one underneath all of that. And that version of you doesn't need certainty. It needs courage. The courage to take the next step without knowing where it leads. The courage to trust yourself even when the outcome is unclear. The courage to build a life based on what feels true instead of what looks safe. That's the third unlearning. And it's the hardest one because it requires you to let go of control, to stop trying to force outcomes, to surrender to the possibility that the life you're meant to live might look nothing like the one you planned. But here's the gift. When you stop trying to control everything, you create space for something better to emerge. Something truer, something more aligned, something that couldn't have existed within the narrow confines of the plan you were clinging to. Fourth, the belief that asking for help is weakness. You learned that independence is strength, that needing people makes you a burden, that vulnerability is dangerous. So you carried everything alone. You pretended you were fine when you were falling apart. You smiled through the pain. You shouldered burdens that were never yours to carry. And you called it strength. But it wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being too much. Fear that if people saw how much you were struggling, they'd realize you weren't worth the effort. So you hid.
You performed competence. You became the one everyone leaned on so no one would notice you were collapsing. And it worked. Until rock bottom stripped away your ability to pretend. Until you were too broken to hide. And too exhausted to keep carrying it all alone. And that's when you discovered the truth. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's the most courageous thing you can do because it requires admitting you're human, that you don't have all the answers, that you can't do it alone. And when you finally ask, when you finally let someone see you without the armor, something miraculous happens. You discover you're not alone, that other people have been where you are, that they understand the weight you've been carrying, that they're willing to hold some of it with you. Not because you earned it, not because you deserve it, because that's what humans do. We help each other. We witness each other's pain and we say, me too. We hold space for each other's struggles and we say, you're not broken, you're just human. That's connection. Real connection. Not the kind you get from performing, the kind you get from being honest. And it only happens when you unlearn the belief that you have to carry everything alone. So here's what the unlearning asks of you. Question everything you thought was true. Examine the beliefs you've been living by and ask, is this mine? Or did I inherit it? Notice the rules you're following and ask, do these serve me? Or am I serving them? Look at the life you've built and ask, is this what I actually want? Or is this what I was told to want? And then slowly, carefully, start letting go. Let go of the need to be perfect. Let go of the belief that your worth is conditional. Let go of the idea that you have to have it all figured out. Let go of the story that you're not enough, because none of it is true. And on the other side of the unlearning, that's where you find yourself. Not the constructed version, not the performing version, the real one. The one that's been waiting underneath all the noise. And that version, that's who you came here to be. Love what you're hearing? Hit that subscribe button and join our community of audiobook lovers. Your support helps us bring you more amazing stories. Chapter 7. Building from Bone. There's a difference between rebuilding and building new. Rebuilding is what you do when you're trying to get back to what was, when you're using the same blueprint, the same materials, the same foundation that cracked under pressure. It's familiar. It's comfortable. It feels like progress. But it's not. It's just reconstruction, a restoration of what failed. Building new is different. Building new means starting from nothing, from the ground that's been scorched clean, from the bones of who you are when everything else has been stripped away. It's terrifying. It's uncertain. It requires faith in something you can't see yet. But it's the only way to create something that will actually hold. This is where you are now, standing in the cleared space, holding the raw materials of yourself, wondering what comes next. And the answer isn't what you think. You're not looking for a plan. You're not looking for a strategy. You're not looking for the next version of success that will finally make you feel complete. You're looking for the truth of who you are underneath all the conditioning, the truth of what you actually want, the truth of what kind of life you're meant to build now that you know what doesn't work. And that truth? It's written in your bones. Not in your achievements, not in your resume, not in the opinions of people who never had to walk through fire. In the part of you that survived when everything else collapsed. That's your foundation now. Let me tell you what building from bone looks like. It looks like starting with values instead of goals. Because goals are external. They're the markers you chase to prove you're making progress, to show the world you're successful, to convince yourself you're enough. But values are internal. They're the principles that guide you when no one's watching. The compass that keeps you oriented when the path is unclear. The foundation that holds you steady when everything else is shifting. And you can't borrow them. You can't inherit them from your parents or your culture or the last self-help book you read. They have to be yours. Discovered, not downloaded. So start there. Ask yourself, what actually matters to me? Not what should matter. Not what looks impressive when you say it out loud. What resonates in your bones when you strip away all the noise? Maybe it's honesty. Not the polite kind, the raw kind. The kind that refuses to pretend everything's fine when it's not. Maybe it's freedom. Not the I can do whatever I want kind. The I'm not beholden to anyone's expectations kind. The kind that lets you make choices based on what feels true instead of what feels safe. Maybe it's creativity, not as a hobby, as a way of being, as the refusal to live by someone else's script. Maybe it's connection, not the surface kind, the kind where you're seen for who you actually are and loved anyway. Whatever it is, let it be true. Let it be specific to you, not universal. Let it be imperfect. Let it contradict what you thought mattered 5 years ago. Because you're not who you were 5 years ago. You're who you're becoming now. And that person is being built from bone. From the values that survived the collapse. From the truths that couldn't be burned away. From the part of you that's still standing when everything else fell. That's your foundation. Second, building from bone means choosing presence over performance. Because performance is exhausting. It's the constant calculation of how you're being perceived. The endless adjustment of your words, your actions, your very existence to fit what others expect. It's why you're tired. Not because you're not strong enough. Because you've been living two lives, the one you show and the one you hide. And the gap between them has been killing you. Building from bone means closing that gap. It means showing up as exactly who you are, not who you think you should be. It means speaking the truth even when your voice shakes. It means setting boundaries even when it disappoints people. It means choosing discomfort over dishonesty. And yes, it will cost you. Some people won't like the real you as much as they liked the performed you. Some relationships will end when you stop contorting yourself to maintain them. Some opportunities will pass you by because you're no longer willing to sacrifice your integrity for them. But here's what you gain. Yourself. The version of you that doesn't need to calculate every move, that doesn't need to edit every word, that can exist in a room without wondering if you're being too much or not enough. The version of you that's just present, not perfect, not impressive, just real. And that version has more power than anything you've ever performed.
Because presence is magnetic.
People feel it when you're actually there, not when you're performing being there. They feel the difference between someone who's calculating and someone who's connected, between someone who's trying to impress and someone who's just being. And they're starving for it, because everyone else is performing too. Everyone else is exhausted from the same act. So when you show up without the mask, when you speak without the filter, when you exist without the armor, you give others permission to do the same. That's not just personal transformation, that's cultural rebellion. Third, building from bone means accepting imperfection as the path, not the obstacle. You've been waiting to be ready, to have it all figured out, to be healed enough, whole enough, good enough to start building. But that's another lie you inherited. The belief that you have to be perfect before you're allowed to begin. So you wait. You work on yourself. You read the books, do the therapy, practice the techniques. You collect tools and strategies like they're going to somehow make you immune to struggle. And you never start. Because perfection is a moving target. There's always one more thing to fix, one more flaw to address, one more layer to unpack before you're finally ready. But ready is a myth. You're never going to feel completely ready. You're never going to have all the answers. You're never going to be without doubt or fear or the possibility of failure. And that's okay. Because building from bone doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. The honesty to say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it anyway. The honesty to build something imperfect and call it progress. The honesty to fail, learn, adjust, and keep going. That's the path. Not a straight line from broken to fixed, a spiral. A messy, non-linear journey where you revisit the same lessons at deeper levels, where you think you've healed something only to discover there's another layer, where progress looks like taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back and calling it movement. Because it is. Every step, even the backward ones, is teaching you something about your limits, about your strength, about what you're capable of when you stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be present. Fourth, building from bone means letting your life become the experiment. You've been looking for the right answer, the proven method, the guaranteed path. But there isn't one. Because your life isn't a problem to solve. It's an experiment to run. And experiments require variables, hypotheses, the willingness to test assumptions and see what happens. So test them. Test the belief that you have to do what you've always done, that you have to stay in the industry you trained for, that you have to live in the city you've always lived in, that you have to maintain relationships that no longer serve you. Test them and see what happens. Maybe you discover you were right, that the familiar path is the right one for you. Or maybe you discover you were wrong, that there's a version of your life you never considered because you were too afraid to deviate from the plan. Either way, you learn. And learning is the point. Not having the answer, not avoiding mistakes, learning who you are through the process of trying things and seeing what resonates. That's building from bone. Not following a blueprint, creating one. One choice at a time, one experiment at a time, one honest conversation with yourself at a time. Anthropologist Mary Catherine Bateson wrote about this. She studied lives across cultures and discovered that the most fulfilling ones weren't the most planned. They were the most improvised. Lives built through what she called creative adaptation, the willingness to let go of the rigid plan and respond to what actually emerges. To see obstacles as invitations, to see detours as new paths, to see failure as information. That's what you're doing now. Not rebuilding the old life with new paint. Building something entirely new from the foundation of who you actually are. And it won't look like anyone else's life. It won't fit the template. It won't make sense to people who haven't walked this path. It won't be Instagrammable or easily explained at dinner parties. But it will be yours. Built from your values, not borrowed ones.
built from your truth, not inherited stories, built from the bones of who you are when everything else falls away. And those bones? They're stronger than anything you ever constructed to impress the world, because they're real. And real is the only foundation that lasts. So stop waiting to be ready. Stop trying to rebuild what failed. Start building from bone, from the part of you that survived, from the truth that remained, from the values that matter when everything else is stripped away. That's your life now. Not the one you lost, the one you're creating. One honest choice at a time.
Chapter 8. The fire you didn't choose. You didn't ask for this. That's the first thing you need to hear. The truth no one says out loud when they're telling you everything happens for a reason or that this is all part of the journey. You didn't choose this fire. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to lose everything. You didn't volunteer for the breakdown, the betrayal, the moment when your entire world collapsed and you were left standing in the ashes wondering, what the hell just happened? This fire found you, and it burned everything you weren't ready to release. That's the part that makes it sacred. Not that you wanted it, not that you deserved it, not that it was somehow cosmically ordained to teach you a lesson, but that you survived it. And in surviving, you discovered something you couldn't have learned any other way. You discovered what remains when everything burns. This chapter isn't about finding meaning in the pain. It's not about silver linings or gratitude for the struggle or any of the spiritual bypassing that tells you to be thankful for trauma. Screw that. This chapter is about what you do with the fire you didn't choose. How you metabolize it. How you let it reshape you without letting it destroy you. How you use it as fuel instead of letting it consume you. Because here's the truth. You have a choice. Not about what happened. That's done. The fire already burned. The damage is already done. But you have a choice about what comes next. You can let the fire define you. You can build your entire identity around the wound. You can become the story of what was done to you, what was taken from you, how you were broken. Or you can let the fire refine you. Let it burn away what was never yours. Let it reveal the core of who you are when everything false is stripped away. Let it become the crucible that forges you into something stronger, truer, more alive than you've ever been. That's not toxic positivity. That's alchemy. And it requires something most people aren't willing to give. It requires you to stop being a victim of the fire and start being a student of it. Let me show you what I mean. First, the fire teaches you what you're made of. You thought you knew. You thought you knew your limits, your breaking point, how much you could handle before you shattered. And then the fire came, and you shattered. And you discovered something astonishing. Shattering isn't the end. It's just a transition. Because on the other side of shattering, you're still here. Changed? Yes. Scarred? Absolutely. But here. Still breathing, still feeling, still capable of standing up one more time even when every part of you wants to stay down. That's what the fire reveals. Not your weakness, your capacity. The depth of your resilience, the breadth of your strength, the stubborn, defiant part of you that refuses to be extinguished no matter how hot the flames get. You didn't know you had that in you. You couldn't have known, because it only emerges under pressure, in crisis, when everything comfortable is stripped away and all that's left is the raw will to survive. That's not something you can learn in a classroom or read in a book. That's something you earn by walking through fire and coming out the other side. Second, the fire teaches you who stays.
When everything's burning, when you're at your absolute worst, when you're not impressive or put together or even remotely functional, you find out who actually loves you. Not the version of you that has it all figured out, not the successful you, not the strong you, the broken you. And most people leave. Not because they're cruel, because they're scared. Because your pain mirrors their own, and they can't handle the reflection. Because they need you to be okay so they don't have to face the fact that they're not. So they disappear. They stop calling. They make excuses. They tell you they're giving you space when what they're really doing is protecting themselves from your reality. And it hurts. It hurts to discover that relationships you thought were solid were actually conditional. That love you thought was unconditional had fine print you never read. But the fire doesn't just reveal who leaves, it reveals who stays. The people who sit with you in the wreckage, who don't try to fix you or rush you or tell you everything happens for a reason, who just show up, who hold space, who say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here.
You can't go back to surface relationships. You can't tolerate conditional love. You can't pretend that connection built on performance is the same as connection built on presence. So the fire doesn't just burn away what's false. It clarifies what's real. Third, the fire teaches you what you actually need. Before the fire, you had a list. Things you thought you needed to be happy, to be successful, to be enough. The right job, the right partner, the right income, the right body, the right life. And then the fire took most of it, or all of it. And you discovered something shocking. You didn't die. You didn't disappear. You didn't cease to exist when the things you thought defined you were taken away. You just changed. And in that change, you learned what you actually need. Not what you want, not what you've been conditioned to chase, what you need to survive, to feel alive, to remain human. And it's less than you thought. Less stuff, less status, less validation. What you actually need is simpler. Honesty, connection, purpose, rest. The freedom to be yourself without apology. That's it. Everything else is optional. The fire taught you that by burning away the optional and leaving only the essential. And now you can't unsee it. You can't go back to accumulating things that don't matter. You can't waste energy on relationships that don't nourish you. You can't build a life around markers of success that leave you empty, because you know what it's like to have nothing. And you know that nothing is closer to truth than the everything you were chasing. Fourth, the fire teaches you that transformation is violent. No one tells you that. They talk about transformation like it's a gentle unfolding, a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, a peaceful evolution into your highest self. But that's not how it works. Real transformation is brutal. It's the caterpillar dissolving into goo inside the cocoon. It's the complete obliteration of what was so that something new can emerge. It's painful. It's disorienting. It feels like dying. Because parts of you are dying. The parts that were never real. The parts you constructed to survive. The parts that needed to be burned away so the truth could emerge. And you can't control it. You can't gentle your way through it. You can't make it comfortable. You can't transform and stay the same. The fire demands everything. And when you give it everything, when you let it burn through every false belief and every borrowed identity and every story you told yourself to feel safe, what emerges isn't who you were, it's who you are. Raw, unfinished, real.
And that version of you is more powerful than anything you ever performed because it's forged in fire. So here's what you do with the fire you didn't choose. You stop asking why it happened. Why is the wrong question? Why keeps you stuck in the past, searching for meaning in something that was always going to be senseless? The right question is, what now? Now that I've walked through fire, who am I becoming? Now that I've survived what I thought would destroy me, what am I capable of? Now that I know what remains when everything burns, what do I build? Those are the questions that move you forward. Not backward into analysis, forward into creation. You didn't choose the fire, but you get to choose what you build from the ashes. And that choice, that's where your power lives. Not in what happened to you, in what you do next.
Chapter 9. Permission to begin again. You're waiting for someone to tell you it's okay. To give you permission to start over. To let go of who you were. To stop apologizing for the fact that your life doesn't look like it's supposed to. You're waiting for validation that it's acceptable to change your mind. To walk away. To choose differently than you chose before. But here's what you need to understand. That permission isn't coming. Not from your family, not from your friends, not from the voices in your head that sound like every person who ever had an opinion about your life. Because those voices are invested in who you were. They're comfortable with the version of you they know, the predictable one, the one who plays the role they assigned. The one who doesn't make waves or ask hard questions or suddenly decide that the life they've been living isn't the life they want. So they won't give you permission. They'll give you concern. They'll give you questions disguised as care. They'll give you reasons why starting over is risky, impractical, selfish, proof that you're running away instead of facing your problems. They'll give you everything except permission. Because your transformation threatens theirs. Your willingness to burn down a life that isn't working mirrors back the lives they're tolerating. Your courage to begin again asks them why they're staying stuck. And that's uncomfortable. So they'll try to pull you back. Not because they don't love you, because they're scared. Scared that if you change, they'll lose you. Scared that if you heal, they'll have to face their own wounds. Scared that if you give yourself permission to begin again, they'll have to admit they've been waiting for permission too. But here's the truth. You don't need their permission. You never did. The only permission you need is your own. And that's the hardest one to give. Because giving yourself permission means taking full responsibility. It means admitting that you're the author of your life, not the victim of it. That you have agency even when it feels like you don't. That you can choose differently even when every external force is telling you to stay the same. It means owning the fact that if you're unhappy, it's your responsibility to change it. Not your partner's job to make you happy, not your employer's job to fulfill you, not the universe's job to align circumstances so that your life magically improves. Yours. And that's terrifying, because responsibility feels like blame. Like you're being told that everything that's gone wrong is your fault. But that's not what this is. This isn't about blame, it's about power. Blame keeps you stuck in the past, cataloging everything that was done to you, everything that went wrong, everything that's outside your control. Power moves you forward. It says, I can't control what happened, but I can control what happens next. I can't change the past,
but I can change my relationship to it. I can't fix everything, but I can start somewhere. That's permission. Not waiting for the world to change, not waiting for conditions to be perfect, not waiting for someone else to validate your choices. Giving yourself permission to begin again right now exactly as you are. Let me tell you what that looks like. It looks like saying, I don't have to stay in this job just because I've been here for 10 years. Those 10 years are data. They taught you what you needed to learn. They showed you what doesn't work. They brought you to this moment where you finally have the clarity to choose differently. But they're not a life sentence. You don't owe your employer your future just because they had your past. You don't owe your industry your loyalty just because it's what you trained for. You owe yourself the truth. And if the truth is that this work is draining you, that it's disaligned with who you're becoming, that you're only staying because you're scared of what comes next, then staying isn't loyalty. It's self-abandonment. So give yourself permission to leave. Not because you failed, because you evolved. It looks like saying, I don't have to maintain relationships that no longer serve me. You're allowed to outgrow people. You're allowed to realize that the friendship that sustained you 5 years ago doesn't fit the person you're becoming. You're allowed to love someone from a distance because being close to them costs too much. That's not cruelty. That's boundaries. And boundaries aren't walls built to keep people out. They're clarity about what you need to remain whole. Some people won't understand. They'll call you selfish. They'll accuse you of changing, as if changing is a character flaw instead of evidence of growth. But you're not responsible for their comfort with your evolution. You're responsible for your own integrity. So give yourself permission to let go. Not because they're bad people, because the relationship doesn't serve who you're becoming. It looks like saying, I don't have to know where I'm going to take the first step. You've been paralyzed by the need for certainty, for a plan, for some guarantee that if you leave what's familiar, there's something better waiting. But certainty is a myth, and waiting for it is just another way of staying stuck.
The truth is, you'll never have all the information. You'll never eliminate all the risk. You'll never feel completely ready. But you don't need to. You just need to know the next step. Not the whole staircase, just the next step. And the next step isn't always forward. Sometimes the next step is rest. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's sitting in the uncertainty long enough to hear what you actually want underneath the noise of what you think you should want. But it's a step. And permission to begin again doesn't require a destination. It just requires movement. Researcher Brené Brown spent years studying shame and vulnerability, and she discovered something critical. She found that shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment, and it dies in empathy, honesty, and connection. Which means the thing keeping you from giving yourself permission isn't external. It's internal. It's the shame telling you that needing to start over means you failed, that changing your mind means you're flaky, that not having it figured out means you're behind. But those are lies. Needing to start over means you're brave enough to admit what isn't working. Changing your mind means you're listening to your truth instead of defending your past decisions. Not having it figured out means you're human. And humanity isn't the flaw, it's the foundation. So here's the permission you've been waiting for. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to want something different than you wanted 5 years ago. You're allowed to walk away from the plan that no longer fits. You're allowed to disappoint people who expected you to stay the same. You're allowed to fail. You're allowed to try something and realize
it's not for you. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to not have all the answers. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to stop pushing, to stop performing, to stop proving. You're allowed to exist without being productive. You're allowed to be exactly where you are, not where you think you should be, not where everyone else is, where you are, right now, with all the mess and uncertainty and imperfection. You're allowed to begin again, as many times as it takes, in as many ways as it takes, without apology, without explanation, without permission from anyone but yourself. That's the gift of rock bottom, not the fall, the freedom that comes after. The freedom to stop living by someone else's rules, to stop waiting for permission that's never coming, to stop apologizing for the fact that your life is unfolding differently than planned. Because here's the truth. There is no plan. There's just this moment. And in this moment, you have a choice. You can keep waiting. Keep staying stuck because it's familiar. Keep tolerating a life that doesn't fit because changing feels too hard, too risky, too uncertain. Or you can give yourself permission. Permission to try. Permission to fail. Permission to build a life that doesn't look like anyone else's because it's actually yours. And when you give yourself that permission, something shifts. The voices that were shouting at you to stay small get quieter. The fear that was paralyzing you becomes manageable. The path that was invisible starts to reveal itself, one step at a time. Not because the external world changed, because you did. You stopped waiting for permission and started giving it to yourself. And that's not just a mindset shift. That's a revolution. Personal at first, but eventually it ripples. Because when you give yourself permission to begin again, you give others permission too. You become proof that it's possible, that people do change, that lives can be rebuilt, that rock bottom isn't the end of the story. It's the sacred restart. And it begins the moment you stop asking if you're allowed and start declaring that you are. You are allowed to begin again, to choose differently, to build a life that's true. No one else can give you that, but you can give it to yourself. Right now, in this moment. That's the permission, and it's the only one you need.
Chapter 10. The Weight You No Longer Carry. There's a moment that happens in the middle of rebuilding. You're walking through your day, doing something ordinary, making coffee, driving to nowhere in particular, standing in the shower, and you notice something strange. Your shoulders feel different, lighter. Not because you've been working out, not because anything external has changed, because you're no longer carrying weight that was never yours to begin with. And the absence of it is so profound, so disorienting, that you almost don't recognize yourself. This is the moment when you realize you've been living under a mountain of invisible weight your entire life. Expectations you didn't choose, responsibilities you didn't agree to, beliefs about who you had to be and what you had to prove, and how much you had to sacrifice to earn your place in the world. You carried it all for so long that you forgot it wasn't part of you. You thought the weight was just the cost of being human, that everyone carried this much, that this was what life felt like. But it wasn't life. It was inherited burden. And rock bottom didn't just take everything from you. It freed you from the weight you didn't know you were carrying. Let me show you what I mean. First, you're no longer carrying other people's expectations. For years, maybe decades, you've been living in reference to what others wanted from you. Your parents wanted you to be successful, so you chased their version of success. Your partner wanted you to be stable, so you sacrificed your dreams for security.
Your friends wanted you to be fun, so you performed happiness even when you were drowning. And you did it. You became what they needed. You shaped yourself to fit their vision. You edited your desires down to something that wouldn't disappoint them. And the weight of that performance was crushing. Because you can't be yourself and be what everyone else needs at the same time. One of those versions has to be abandoned. And for most of your life, you abandoned yourself. You made yourself small so others could be comfortable. You silenced your needs so you wouldn't be too much. You dimmed your light so you wouldn't outshine anyone. And it worked. People liked you. People needed you. People told you that you were doing great. But you were dying inside. Because living for other people's expectations is slow suffocation. And rock bottom cut the oxygen completely. When you lost everything, you lost the ability to maintain the performance. You couldn't be what they needed anymore because you barely had the energy to exist. And in that failure, you discovered something astonishing. You didn't need their approval to survive. You needed your truth. And your truth has no interest in meeting expectations. It's too busy becoming real. So that weight, the one that told you to be smaller, quieter, more palatable, you're not carrying it anymore. You're done performing, done contorting, done sacrificing who you are for the comfort of people who never asked you to. And the absence of that weight feels like flight. Second, you're no longer carrying the story that you're not enough. That story has been running in the background of your life like malware, slowing you down, corrupting your files, convincing you that no matter what you achieve, it won't be enough to prove your worth. So you pushed harder, achieved more, collected evidence of your value like it was currency that could buy you self-acceptance. But it never did. Because the story wasn't about what you accomplished. It was about what you believed. And what you believed was a lie. The lie that your worth is conditional, that you have to earn it, that you're only valuable when you're useful, productive, perfect. That lie was installed early, by parents who loved you but didn't know how to show it without conditions, by a culture that profits from your insecurity, by every experience that taught you that love had to be earned and acceptance had to be proven. And you carried it. Like a stone in your chest, a voice in your head, a weight that made every success feel hollow and every failure feel fatal. But rock bottom shattered that story, because when you had nothing left to prove and no one left to impress, you discovered something the story never told you. You're still here, still breathing, still feeling, still capable of love and joy and connection. Not because of what you achieved, because of what you are. Human, imperfect and messy, and utterly, impossibly enough. And once you know that, once you feel it in your bones instead of just reading it in a book, the story loses its power. You're not carrying it anymore. You're not trying to prove your worth. You're not chasing validation. You're not measuring your value by external metrics. You just are. And that's enough. Third, you're no longer carrying the belief that struggle equals virtue. This one's insidious because the culture you grew up in worships suffering. It celebrates the grind. It tells you that if you're not exhausted, you're not working hard enough, that rest is laziness, that struggle is the price of success. So, you struggled. You pushed through pain. You ignored your body's limits. You wore your burnout like a badge of honor. And you called it dedication. But it wasn't dedication. It was self-destruction dressed up as discipline. And your body has been trying to tell you that for years. Through illness, through exhaustion, through the breakdown that brought you to rock bottom. Your body was begging you to stop. Not because you're weak, because you're human. And humans aren't designed to function under constant pressure. We're designed to cycle, to move between effort and rest, between action and integration. But you didn't listen. You couldn't, because listening meant admitting that the way you were living wasn't sustainable. And admitting that felt like failing. So, you kept going, until your body made the choice for you, until it shut down, until it forced you to rest in the only way it knew how, by refusing to let you continue. And in that forced rest, you learned something revolutionary. Rest isn't the absence of productivity. Rest is the foundation of it. It's where your body heals, where your mind processes, where your creativity regenerates. Without rest, you're not building anything sustainable. You're just running yourself into the ground. So that weight, the one that told you to keep pushing, keep grinding, keep sacrificing your health for achievement, you're not carrying it anymore. You're learning that rest is resistance, that slowing down is strength, that you can build a meaningful life without destroying yourself in the process. And that shifts everything. Fourth, you're no longer carrying the past as punishment. You've spent years revisiting your mistakes, replaying your failures, cataloging every wrong decision, every missed opportunity, every moment where you chose poorly. And you've been using them as evidence that you're broken, that you can't be trusted, that you'll always mess it up. But that's not what the past is for. The past isn't a weapon to beat yourself with. It's data, information, evidence of what you've learned, what you survived, what you're capable of enduring. Every mistake taught you something. Every failure revealed something. Every moment you thought would destroy you and didn't made you stronger. Not because the pain was good, because you metabolized it. You turned it into wisdom, into resilience, into the capacity to sit with discomfort without running from it. That's not failure. That's mastery. And when you stop using the past to punish yourself and start using it to inform yourself, the weight lifts. Because you're not broken. You're educated by fire, by struggle, by every moment you survived that you thought you wouldn't. And that education is sacred. So let go of the weight. Let go of the expectations that were never yours. Let go of the story that you're not enough. Let go of the belief that suffering equals virtue. Let go of the past as punishment. Because carrying all of that isn't strength. It's bondage. And you didn't survive rock bottom just to rebuild the same prison with different bars. You survived it to be free. Free to exist without apology. Free to build without the burden. Free to move through the world without carrying the weight of everyone else's needs, expectations, and projections. That's the gift, not the loss, the lightness that comes after. And when you feel it, when you notice your shoulders dropping and your breath deepening and your step lightening, you'll realize something profound. You were always enough. You just couldn't feel it under all that weight. But now you can.
Chapter 11. What Remains When Nothing Does. There's a Zen story about a monk who spent decades building a beautiful garden. Every stone placed with intention, every plant chosen with care, every path designed to lead visitors toward contemplation. He poured his life into it. And then one night, a storm came. It destroyed everything. The carefully arranged stones were scattered, the trees were uprooted, the paths were washed away. When the monk saw the devastation at dawn, his students waited for him to collapse, to rage, to grieve the loss of his life's work. Instead, he smiled. "Now," he said, "I can see the mountain again." The garden had been beautiful, but it had also been blocking his view. He had to lose it to remember what was underneath. That's where you are now. standing in the ruins of the garden you built, the life you constructed stone by stone, the identity you cultivated with such care. All of it scattered. And everyone's waiting for you to collapse. But something else is happening. You're starting to see the mountain. The thing that was always there underneath all the construction. The foundation that doesn't need decoration. The truth that exists independent of what you build on top of it. You. Not the performed version, not the constructed version, not the version that was shaped to fit someone else's expectations. The essential you. The one that remains when nothing else does. This chapter is about learning to recognize that version, to trust it, to build from it instead of on top of it. Because what remains isn't the rubble, it's the ground. And the ground has been waiting for you to notice it. Let me tell you what's there. First, what remains is your capacity to feel. You thought the fall would numb you, that losing everything would turn you into stone, that the only way to survive this much pain was to shut down completely. And maybe you tried. Maybe you spent weeks or months in emotional lockdown, keeping everything at arm's length, refusing to let yourself feel the full weight of what you lost. But you couldn't maintain it. Because feelings aren't optional. They're not something you can permanently suppress without consequence. They're information. Messages from the deepest part of yourself about what matters, what hurts, what needs attention. And when you finally stopped running from them, when you let yourself feel the grief and the rage and the devastating loneliness, something unexpected happened. You didn't disappear into them. You moved through them. Like water, like weather. They rose, peaked, crashed, receded. And you remained. Still breathing. Still here. Still capable of feeling the full spectrum of human emotion without being destroyed by it. That capacity, that's what remains. Not the numbness, not the performance of being fine, the raw, honest ability to feel everything and let it move through you. That's power. Because most people spend their entire lives running from feelings, building elaborate defense mechanisms to avoid pain, constructing entire identities around not feeling too much. But you can't do that anymore. Rock bottom stripped away the defenses, and what you discovered underneath is that feelings won't kill you. They'll just tell you the truth about what you need, what you value, what you can't tolerate anymore. And that truth is the compass you've been searching for. Second, what remains is your instinct. You've spent years overriding it, ignoring the voice inside that said something was wrong, dismissing the gut feeling that told you to leave, to speak up, to trust yourself. You learned to distrust your instinct because it didn't align with what you were supposed to want. It didn't make logical sense. It couldn't be defended with data or justified with reasoning. So you silenced it. You made decisions with your head instead of your gut. You followed the plan instead of the pull. You stayed in situations your instinct told you to flee because leaving didn't look responsible. And it brought you here, to the place where all that logic and planning and rational decision-making led you to a life that didn't fit. So you can't ignore your instinct anymore, because it's the only part of you that's been consistently honest. It tried to warn you, tried to redirect you, tried to get your attention through whispers and then shouts, and finally through the collapse that forced you to listen. And now that you're listening, now that you're paying attention to the subtle knowing that lives underneath thought, you're discovering something. Your instinct knows the way. Not the safe way, not the easy way, the true way. The way that aligns with who you actually are instead of who you're supposed to be. And when you follow it, when you make choices based on what feels right instead of what looks right, something shifts. Life stops feeling like a constant fight, not because it gets easier, because it gets honest. And honest, even when it's hard, is better than easy and false. Third, what remains is your voice. The real one, not the one you use to navigate social situations or meet professional expectations. The voice that exists when you stop performing. It's been buried for so long you might not recognize it at first. It sounds different than you expected. Less polished, less certain, more raw. But it's yours. And it's been trying to speak through you for years. Through the art you were too afraid to make, through the words you were too scared to say, through the truth you kept swallowing because it didn't fit the image you were maintaining. Rock bottom didn't take your voice. It gave it back. Because when you have nothing left to lose, you have nothing left to protect. And when you have nothing to protect, you can finally say what's true. Not what's palatable. Not what will make people comfortable. What's true. And your voice, when it's unfiltered, is a force. It cuts through pretense. It names what others are too afraid to acknowledge. It speaks the truth that everyone's thinking but no one's saying. That's what remains. Not the careful, curated version of yourself that knew how to navigate every room. The unedited version that has something to say and doesn't need permission to say it. And when you start using that voice, when you let it speak without censoring it for palatability, you discover something profound. Some people will hate it. They'll tell you you've changed, that you're too much, that you need to calm down, tone it down, dial it back. But other people will feel it. They'll recognize the sound of someone telling the truth in a world full of performance. They'll be drawn to the authenticity because they're starving for it. And those people, those are your people. Not the ones who needed you to be small, the ones who can handle you at full volume. Fourth, what remains is your hunger for meaning. Not success, not achievement, not the next milestone or promotion or proof that you matter. Meaning. The sense that what you're doing with your life actually matters. That you're contributing something that couldn't exist without you. That your existence is in service of something larger than your own survival. That hunger never went away. It's what was driving you all along, even when you were chasing the wrong things. You weren't pursuing money or status for their own sake. You were pursuing them because you thought they would give you meaning. But they didn't. Because meaning can't be purchased or achieved. It can only be created. Through work that aligns with your values. Through relationships that honor your truth. Through the choice to live in integrity even when it costs you. And that hunger, that deep longing to matter, is what remains when everything else falls away. It's not something rock bottom took from you. It's something rock bottom revealed to you. Because now that all the false pursuits have been stripped away, now that you're no longer chasing external markers of success, you can finally ask the question that matters. What do I actually want to contribute? Not what looks impressive, not what pays well. What feels meaningful when I'm on my deathbed looking back at how I spent my one precious life? That question doesn't have an easy answer, but it has a real one. And the hunger to find it, to live it, to build your life around it, that's what remains. Finally, what remains is your capacity for love. Real love. Not the conditional kind, not the transactional kind, not the kind that requires you to be perfect or useful or anything other than exactly who you are. The kind that sees you in your brokenness and doesn't flinch. You thought rock bottom would make you unlovable. That being this damaged, this uncertain, this far from having it all figured out would disqualify you from connection. But the opposite happened. The people who loved the real you, the broken you, the still figuring it out you, those relationships got deeper. Because there's no performance left to maintain. No image to uphold. No pretending that everything's fine when it's not. Just presence. Just honesty. Just two people being human together. And that capacity,
The ability to love and be loved without condition is what remains when nothing else does. Because love isn't something you do. It's who you are when you stop doing anything. When you're just present, just honest, just willing to be seen. That's the mountain the monk was talking about. Not the garden, not the construction, not the carefully arranged life that looks beautiful from the outside. The mountain, the foundation, the ground, the essential truth of who you are when everything else is stripped away. You didn't lose yourself in the fall. You found yourself underneath the rubble. And what you found is stronger than anything you ever built on top of it, because it's real. It doesn't need maintenance, it doesn't need validation, it doesn't need anything except recognition. So stop searching for what you lost. Start recognizing what remains. Your capacity to feel, your instinct, your voice, your hunger for meaning, your capacity for love. That's not wreckage. That's the foundation. And everything you build from here will be built on it. Not on borrowed beliefs, not on inherited expectations, not on the need to prove anything to anyone. On truth. On the part of you that survived when everything else fell away. On what remains when nothing does. And that's where the sacred restart begins.
Chapter 12. The Sacred Restart. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi. When a bowl breaks, instead of throwing it away or trying to hide the cracks, artisans mend it with lacquer mixed with gold. The broken places become the most beautiful part, not despite the damage, because of it. The bowl isn't restored to its original state. It's transformed into something more valuable, something that could only exist because it was broken. That's what you're doing now. Not rebuilding who you were, becoming who you are when you stop hiding the cracks. This is the sacred restart. Not sacred because it's holy or pure or untouched by pain. Sacred because it's honest. Because you're finally building a life from the truth instead of the performance. From the foundation instead of the facade. From the part of you that survived when everything else fell away. This chapter isn't about what comes next. It's about how you move forward when the path isn't clear, when there's no roadmap, when you're standing in the middle of your own life with no idea what you're building but absolute clarity about what you're not. Because that clarity, that's enough. Let me show you what the sacred restart looks like. First, it looks like building smaller. You spent years trying to build big, impressive, the kind of life that would make people stop and stare, the kind of success that would prove you made it. What big wasn't sustainable. Big required constant maintenance, constant performance, constant effort to hold it all together. And when it collapsed, you discovered something. Big was exhausting. Small is sacred. Small is the morning ritual that grounds you before you face the day. It's the 3 people who actually see you. It's the work that matters to you even if it doesn't matter to anyone else. Small is building a life you don't need to escape from. That's the restart. Not recreating the empire, creating the daily practices that make you feel alive. Not impressing the world, honoring yourself. Not accumulating more, cultivating what matters. Because you can't maintain big anymore. Your nervous system won't allow it. Your body won't tolerate it. Your soul has already shown you what happens when you prioritize impressive over sustainable. So build small. Build a morning where you're not immediately overwhelmed. Build relationships where you don't have to perform. Build work that nourishes you instead of depleting you. That's not settling. That's wisdom. It's understanding that the life you can actually live is more valuable than the life that looks good in theory. Second, the sacred restart looks like choosing truth over comfort. You've spent your whole life choosing comfort. Not because you're weak, because you're human.
You stayed in the job that was killing you because leaving was uncomfortable. You maintained relationships that diminished you because ending them felt cruel. You kept living by rules that didn't serve you because breaking them meant facing judgment. Comfort kept you safe, but it also kept you small. Because growth doesn't happen in comfort. Transformation doesn't happen when everything's easy. Becoming who you're meant to be requires walking through the discomfort of not knowing, not fitting, not having it all figured out. And that's what the sacred restart demands. Not that you have all the answers, that you're willing to sit in the questions. Not that you eliminate all risk, that you take the next step anyway. Not that you know it will work, that you trust yourself enough to try. That's uncomfortable. Every day you'll face choices between the comfortable lie and the uncomfortable truth. Between staying silent and speaking up. Between maintaining the image and showing the reality. Between doing what's expected and doing what's true. And the sacred restart asks you to choose truth. Even when it costs you. Even when it disappoints people. Even when it means sitting in uncertainty instead of forcing a resolution. Because comfort without truth is just numbness. And you didn't survive rock bottom to spend the rest of your life numb. Third, the sacred restart looks like accepting that you're unfinished. You've been trying to arrive, to reach some final destination where you're healed, whole, complete, where you have it all figured out and you never struggle again. But that destination doesn't exist. Because you're not a project with a completion date. You're a process, a living, evolving, constantly becoming work in progress. And the moment you accept that, the moment you stop trying to fix yourself into some final form, you become free. Free to grow, free to change, free to be different next year than you are today. That's the sacred restart. Not becoming perfect, becoming authentic. Not eliminating all your flaws, integrating all your parts. Not arriving at some final version of yourself, allowing yourself to evolve. And that evolution is messy. Some days you'll feel like you're making progress. Other days you'll feel like you're back at the beginning. Some moments you'll have clarity, others you'll be drowning in confusion. That's not failure. That's being human. And the sacred restart doesn't ask you to transcend your humanity, it asks you to honor it. To be gentle with yourself on the hard days, to celebrate the small wins, to forgive yourself when you fall back into old patterns and choose differently next time. Because transformation isn't linear, it's a spiral.
You'll revisit the same lessons at deeper levels. You'll face the same fears with new tools. You'll think you've healed something only to discover there's another layer. And all of that is sacred. Not because it's comfortable, because it's real. Fourth, the sacred restart looks like contribution without depletion. You used to believe that giving meant emptying yourself, that service required sacrifice, that helping others meant neglecting yourself, that you had to choose between your needs and theirs. But that's not service. That's self-abandonment. And the sacred restart asks for something different. It asks you to give from overflow, not from depletion, to contribute in ways that nourish you while nourishing others, to use your gifts without destroying yourself in the process. Because the world doesn't need another person running themselves into the ground in the name of helping. The world needs you whole, not perfect, not selfless, whole. Someone who knows their limits and honors them. Someone who gives generously but stops before they're empty. Someone who models the truth that you can be of service without sacrificing yourself. That's the sacred restart. Not doing more, doing what matters. Not proving your worth through exhaustion. Expressing your values through aligned action. Not giving until you collapse. Giving from a place of fullness. And that changes everything. Because when you're not depleted, when you're not running on fumes, when you're not giving from obligation or guilt or the need to prove you matter, your contribution becomes more powerful. Not because you're doing more, because you're doing it from truth. Finally, the sacred restart looks like living the questions instead of forcing the answers. You want to know what comes next, what your life will look like 6 months from now, what you'll be doing, who you'll be with, whether this will all work out. But those answers aren't available yet. Not because you're doing it wrong, because they're still being created. Through the choices you make, the risks you take, the ways you show up when you don't know what comes next. The sacred restart doesn't give you a blueprint. It gives you a practice. The practice of trusting yourself one decision at a time. The practice of choosing truth over comfort. The practice of building from the foundation instead of the facade. And that practice is enough. Not because it guarantees success, because it guarantees integrity. You might not know where you're going, but you know who you're becoming. Someone who tells the truth, someone who honors their instincts, someone who builds from values instead of expectations, someone who isn't performing anymore, someone who's finally real. And that version of you doesn't need all the answers. That version just needs the courage to keep walking. One step, one choice, one honest moment at a time. That's the sacred restart. Not a dramatic transformation. A daily practice of choosing yourself. Not a single moment of arrival. A lifetime of becoming. Not the elimination of struggle, the integration of it. Because you are the bowl mended with gold. The cracks aren't your shame. They're your beauty. They're proof that you broke and you didn't stay broken. That you fell and you got back up. That you lost everything and you discovered what remains. And what remains is enough. More than enough. It's the foundation for a life you don't have to perform. A life that's built on truth instead of image, on presence instead of performance, on the sacred, messy, beautiful reality of who you actually are. That's the gift of losing everything. Not the loss, the restart, the chance to build something real from the ruins, to become someone you don't have to recover from being, to live a life that doesn't require a breakdown to force you back to yourself. Because you're already here, standing on the holy ground of nothing. And from nothing, anything true can grow. So let it. Let the life you're meant to live emerge from the ashes of the one that wasn't. Let yourself become who you are when you stop trying to be who you should be. Let this be the sacred restart. Not because rock bottom was a gift, because you transformed it into one. By surviving, by learning, by becoming. And now you begin. Not from where you were, from where you are. Right here, right now. Exactly as you are. That's enough. You're enough. And this is your sacred restart.